Wow. I hadn't intended on doing an immediate subsequent trash day, but I felt a sense of urgency because my brain is having great difficulty processing the overload of garbage that I'm being told to accept. Our government bodies don't give a monkey's fart about how much they affect a person's health and well-being and general peace of mind, with the more distasteful players like Trudeau getting a thrill out of upsetting the pathways of others because they love to tear everyone else down in reprisal for their own tortured existence of miserable uselessness. You can tell he just wants to bring everyone else down in flames, sort of like how the guy that's losing at Monopoly conquers the game by decorating the floor with it. If he isn't going to be the winner, then nobody is. And although Trudeau thinks the PM's office is his rightful and hallowed throne, he knows deep inside it's an unearned achievement and he has no business whatsoever to be holding that position. But I'm real sick and tired of having a chronically clenched jaw and feeling a knot in my stomach when I muse upon the foreboding future that this is all leading to, especially when I was already in a relative state of tension because of trying to deal with the unjust actions of our government on a personal level. So I'm so fucking fed up with them, all of them. They're such slithering, destructive parasites. They don't give a shit about anything, with the exception of their little social media platforms they all have on Facebook and Twitter that they love to use like a parade float to make all their bullshit and lies visually exciting. Apart from that and the money they're stealing from taxpayers, they don't care. On Trash Day 1, I briefly mentioned that Trudeau is demanding that people unplug their brains. But it's actually worse than that, because after you unplug it, he expects that you plug it back into his network of lunacy, like a fucking lobotomy. So I don't know why more of the general public aren't getting seriously enraged about how stupid our entire government is expecting the public to be. And I mean the entire government. Yes, first on the agenda is ejecting Trudeau because he's so toxic, but the Conservatives are demanding that you be stupid as well. Just the fact that they want you to believe they're the genuine good guys and not just the sandier shore of the swamp is the first indication they want you to be stupid. Because a swamp is all it is, and it's all a theater show, and they are demanding that you be stupid. Demanding. Arrogantly demanding. Remain quiet and believe what you hear and watch the show while keeping both hands and feet inside the vehicle at all times. Maybe that's what people need to be hearing more often and realizing. They are demanding that you be stupid. It's not me that's demanding that you be stupid. They are. I'm just giving you a crisp reminder. Trudeau does it regularly with his pretentious smirk. After every question he's asked, his smirk says that he thinks everyone is a simple-minded little child that needs Trudeau as their shepherd to manage all that serious grown-up stuff while given an encouraging little pat on the head and told to run along and play now. He does the same thing with his tone as well. He speaks down to people as if his audience are 5-year-old children. I can sometimes speak to people as if they're acting like they're 5, because they so often do, which is why we're in this position we are today, but I don't speak to them as if they actually are 5, and it's story time. There's a big difference. And there's also a big difference between someone pointing out that you're doing something stupid and someone telling you that you need to be stupid. I certainly do the former, but not the latter. But that's what they're doing. And day by day it gets worse. I mean, every fucking day there's a host of deranged things that have occurred that I'm supposed to just nod my head to and say, oh, okie dokie then, carry on. Among them would be the recent ordeal that came up with this latest jihadi ISIS fighter that seems to be going around making podcasts with journalists. I'll get to that in a minute, but first I want to focus on this other situation that just arose in the news that many are aware of. It's concerning a letter that was distributed in the Gravenhurst area that ended up in the hands of the police that contained Islamic threats concerning an agenda to destroy Ontario's beaches from Toronto to North Bay. Barely a peep about it in the overall news, as usual, and it's even more alarming in how within what little coverage there was of it, it's treated quite flippantly despite the extent of the threats. It says at the end that the OPP are taking it very seriously, but when we observe how serious they take our borders, I doubt there will be much commotion forthcoming. But let's question, what exactly are they taking seriously? The damage to the beaches? That matters for certain, but how about other provocative elements of the letter that encompass a larger sphere of demographics, shall we say? The author of the article peppered in some comments relating to what I'm getting at, like,
the rejection of Islam and a following of the great Satan are highlighted as the motives behind the alleged destruction.
But then tries to diffuse that with this.
The letter also says,
the IRF fights against the disgraceful and unjust religious persecution of Muslim Canadians and of Islamic peoples throughout the world.
The IRF being the Islamic Revolutionary Force, of course. But let's not rely on the little scraps and half quotes the slothful CTV has offered. Let's dig into the real gossipy parts of the letter.
We do this because you reject Islam and follow the great Satan. Infidels, you allow your women to disgracefully, shamelessly parade around your beaches all but naked. A Muslim woman would not even think to do this. Your women are whores with no shame and low morals.
I'll get back to that, but the threats are certainly interesting.
Yes, we cannot pull off anything like 9/11, but we can destroy your tourist industry, hurt your people, derail your trains, poison your water supply, start devastating forest fires, infidels, publish our warning for all to see, reject the false religion of the great.
And that's where I'm going to unplug that and ask why CTV doesn't think poisonous water is important enough to mention. Especially when the overall warning doesn't even read like a letter, but more like an Islamic business plan based on a terrorist market survey. But since poison water seems of little concern, then I guess I can only ask why no hysterics about all this hateful misogyny accompanied with the threats. Shouldn't the misogyny at least count for something? Isn't it grandstanding the kind of hate that all you social justice warriors are rallied to slay? Shouldn't you don the pussy hats and get busy making some fucking signs? Won't you confront such unleashed hatred for Western women? Poison the beaches and waters that those Western girls frequent because they're whores with low morals for wearing a bikini while enjoying a refreshing dip. Where the blazes is Climate Barbie? That's a bonanza for her cause. Environmental sabotage and misogyny all in one. She could get such good mileage with that on Twitter. Oh yes, once again, silly me. It's Islam. What could I possibly have been thinking? Islam is allowed to be misogynist and whatever else they want it to be because all their demented and twistedly fucked up ideas fall under the category of faith. They're discharged from all forms of human standards, principles, and responsibilities because under the umbrella of faith, the invisible man in the sky is the fulcrum of the argument. And when you make a fulcrum invisible and grant it diplomatic immunity from critical thinking and discourse because people are sensitive little crybabies and call it too controversial, then I'm afraid you're never really going to solve the fucking problem. Just after the van attack in Toronto, this witch here had the nerve to pass a comment about the rise of hate in our society and the connection it has with the alt-right.
We have to have a conversation about misogyny, about the rise in hate and the connection to what some call the alt-right, and I think it's a conversation that's just not being had loudly enough in our society.
I'm getting so sickened by these freaks and how they think they're professors of life skills, when in reality they're nothing short of a walking social biohazard. One thing I do find amusing about the likes of Exhibit A here is that they're always the ones stamping their feet in a tantrum, demanding that all the oil needs to stay in the ground. But yet they're the ones that always seem to be outfitted with the gigantic plastic glasses that seem to be growing and steadily requiring more plastic all the time, and therein requiring more oil and thus placing stronger demands on the fossil fuel industry and consequently causing a much larger carbon footprint. And that's likely going to piss off Climate Barbie, and besides, she needs all that plastic for her house and her car and her brain. They're like a circus carnival act within themselves. It's so absurd these freaks are running our country. Every day I shake my head in disbelief, and again I'll say that I'm disturbed at the lack of public outrage, or even awareness for that matter. More tacitly beyond the reaches of the YouTube dome, so to speak. For instance, at Tim Hortons, when greeted as to how my day is, I commonly say, pretty miserable actually, and they respond with,
Oh, having a bad day? One of those days, is it?
With our government being so ill-natured at this juncture, I see it as somewhat of a rhetorical inquiry. But nonetheless, I say, no, not just a bad day. We have a psychologically disturbed traitor at the helm of our country, so it's pretty hard to be enlightened. To which a glazed or perplexed look is the usual response. Our country is currently run by carnival freaks, and few seem to know or care. Returning to the letter, I wonder if Patty likes to wear a bikini. If you do, Patty, then they think you're a lousy, shameless whore with low morals. But such judgments get a VIP backstage pass with you because it's permissible that Muslims think you're a whore with low morals because they're administering their critique off the docket of the invisible man in the sky. Imagine that. Whereas now, if it's me talking, according to you, my attack on you right here and now is conveniently consolidated as an attack on all women. Yes, sirree, I must hate all women because I despise you. But I'm afraid that's not how it works, and inasmuch as that's quite clear to see, is the part that you people can't seem to figure out or see. But I say it's really a case of you just refusing to see it. Intentional ignorance. I find intentional ignorance to be particularly ill-natured because you're actually putting an effort into your state of ignorance. But I must say your confusion is pretty extensive when it comes to the rise of hate and where unjustified hate is occurring. Incidentally, my hate for you is quite justified, and for a variety of reasons. Firstly, I hate you because you advocate subhuman policies and mandates that embrace barbaric ideas that don't belong on planet Earth. And among those ideas in question are depraved ideas that are held collectively, that degrade women collectively, And the word collectively is the operative concept here when we're discussing unjustified discrimination. I'm obligated to hate you because you sponsor, pander to, and make excuses for and encourage ideologies that don't belong on planet Earth. It's that simple. Or we can just ask the same question I like to ask Ikra Khalid. Do you have a problem with being one of 4 wives? You smug, half-witted wannabe social guru. You like to lecture about what's not being talked about loudly enough, while you ignore what needs to be talked about the loudest. Secondly, I hate you because you're such a fucking hypocrite that smears the whole name and concept of a rational woman. Rational women don't advocate policies that belittle women. And again, normally a glaringly obvious thing to realize, but not when you live in an age where intentional ignorance has reached horizons beyond anything that can be imagined. And that's why you have the whole idea of hate speech all twisted and mangled, because it's tailored to your twisted and mangled needs. My hate for you is not hate speech. As I just said, I'm obligated to despise someone that not only champions barbaric policies towards women, but at the same time grandstands herself as the quintessential protector of women. It's the grossest thing I've ever seen. On the other hand, if the letter pertained to something aggressive towards Islam, then it would be plastered all over the national and global news, and fruitcakes like Paddy here would be screaming hate crime and all the rest of their white nationalist rhetoric. And the truly sad part is that for all intents and purposes, it doesn't even matter if the letter turned out to be a big hoax, because the basic attitudes and desires are an open reflection of their creed. And that's the fucking problem that's getting overlooked, which is bringing me back to my opening about the jihadi ghostwriter. People do need to be wary not to get roped into what the media and their lever pullers are still trying to do here by continuing to introduce some spooky characters. The media is pure poison, so keep in mind that special news episodes like this are not produced to provide you with awareness and answers. No, quite the contrary. They're still trying to sensationalize the ISIS thing as much as they can to make it seem like that's the only thing we need to be worried about. That said, I'll also make it clear that I'm not trying to delegitimize any of those extreme risks and hazards. Our borders and immigration situation is a disaster. But what I'm saying is, if they get everyone all excited and hysterically focused on the extreme boogeyman, then all is well with the cauldron of Islam brewing and thickening in the background. Which basically means introducing and allowing the abnormal to merge and coexist with the normal. A perfect example is the change in our laws to allow witnesses in court to wear a niqab in certain cases. This defies the whole process of justice and people appearing in court. It makes a mockery of the whole system, and they're the ones getting the laugh. So to repeat the point, if they have your bowels in an uproar and worry about these guys, then they know they can quietly pull in the canvas and silently drift past with this news while you're looking the other way, better known as a diversion. But these are acts of piracy and mutiny against the rational laws that we do have, and thus against our very way of life. People shouldn't even be in a courtroom with their face covered, never mind testifying. People shouldn't even be walking around with their face covered in the first place. Not to mention the increase in chances of a newborn getting rickets because of the lack of vitamin D from the absence of sunlight because the mother is walking around wearing a tarp. If there wasn't so many moral cowards in the world, this shit would have been laughed out of existence long ago. You can't allow people to testify in a court of law with their face covered. Not only is it another example of how religion itself is nothing but an open rebellion against reason, it's also another example of the double-decker idiocy that's going on here. And by that I mean that it's dumb enough that people would even table the idea seriously, never mind a further group of clowns shoehorning it in with a rubber stamp. And with the swamp media helping wiggle it all through, it's a hideous set of circumstances to watch developing. That said, the lever pullers know it's essential that they hype an extremist idea in order to overpower the reality that allowing an influx of Islam is cultural suicide. It's like playing Russian roulette with a full revolver. That's why there's this big emphasis on the idea of radicalization and de-radicalization. On that note, let's just merge right into the middle of this discussion that was on the news recently concerning this jihadi in Toronto. The news banner says, Canadian ISIS fighter confesses to killing, and then beneath it, as of September 2017, no charges had been laid. It's really bizarre, and bizarre in more ways than one. At first glance, an inquiring mind could see the ISIS misconstrued as an acronym that's symbolizing an agency that's supposed to be on our side. You know, sort of like the RCMP, even though the RCMP aren't really on our side. So then a further question from an inquiring mind could be, so what does the Canadian ISIS fighter stand for? Canadian Infiltration Squad Intelligence Stealth Fighter? And of course the prompt answer to that is no, but it gets worse really, because even once established that the fighter is actually an adversary of Western values, and thus Canada, it could still be interpreted as though it's okay that he's an ISIS fighter as long as he doesn't actually voice any confessions about his crusades and escapades in his fight against the West. This is just how nutty everything is getting, speaking in contexts that presuppose convoluted contexts. There is no such thing as a Canadian ISIS fighter in the sense that Canadians fight alongside ISIS. Oh, again, silly me. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, right, slime puddle? I'll tell you what, back in the old days, there was no silly lip service about whether or not a citizenship was stripped from you when you were found guilty of treason because they hung you from a fucking rope. In fact, a soldier was refused the mercy of a firing squad because he deserved to hang and twitch from the end of a rope. And what did get stripped from him before he hung would have been his chevrons and ribbons, if he had any. But Trudeau gives a whole new meaning to dual citizenship, and all you moral cowards that are contributing to the wholesale destruction of our country by Islam deserve to twitch from the end of a rope. Moving back to the news report, it's an absolute spectacle to see Mark Holland here, the so-called parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Safety, put on this big phony act of intensity when talking about how our law enforcement is doing its job. They're not doing their job because they're in on the game. I'm sickened by all this phony outrage. He rebukes Candice Bergen about how reprehensible it is to turn this issue into a political one, and then he turns around and politically attacks her by saying the Conservatives made 0 ISIS fighter arrests. I thought it was reprehensible to take a political angle and tally on it. Then he demonstrates some more phony outrage and concern about how public safety deserves better than playing games, and we deserve better. At which point, Candice parrots, yes, we do deserve better.
Mark,
don't play politics.
Mark, don't come on me. This was your prime minister that said this. This is what your prime minister
Public
said.
Safety and national
we do
security
deserve better. We do deserve
than
better.
Playing games.
Yes, we do deserve better. A lot better. But better than all of you, you see? That's the problem. All the government and media alike. You're all such worthless, destructive parasites.
Your
Pretending that people who want to do this country harm is somehow I care less about that than you do, Candice?
Mark,
let's be straight for a second.
Mark,
look into the camera and say I don't care about whether or not people are attacked by terrorists. Real.
Okay.
Be real, he says. Your brain is in a stalemate, so I think you should reconsider your self-assessment of acute awareness. The newscast is too long to play in its entirety, but earlier he mentioned radicalization and de-radicalization and preventing lost souls from going down those dark paths.
Yes, even using the arts to stop somebody from ever starting down that path. When somebody begins to go down a dark path, begins to be persuaded by the ideals of terrorism, extremism, in any of its manifestations.
What would you know about the difference between dark and light paths? You're going to use the arts as preventive maintenance to, and I quote, stop people from engaging in the kind of hate that leads to those things. Well, you better start with this. It's their book. This is what they're engaging in. This is the hate right here. When Christopher Hitchens said this...
This is very urgent business, ladies and gentlemen, I beseech you. Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing.
He wasn't talking about this. He was talking about this. But this is not resisting. Quite the contrary, actually. That's why I've flashed these news articles various times in previous videos, because it's insane. It's insane and deserves its own stage for outrage. I also did one of my little monkey cartoons that I'm quite partial to doing to illustrate the foolishness. Mark Holland blabs away about justice and the thoroughness of our law enforcement and intelligence agencies. I see little attention to detail when they're already offering handicaps to witness testimonies of those typically involved in these kinds of events. And Holland also mentioned CSIS. You may as well change the C for an I because you're looking at CSIS. That's no joke, that's Mubin Sheikh. I just call him Mubin shit. He's an ex-jihadi that has since worked for CSIS and the RCMP and is now considered an expert on terrorism and radicalization and de-radicalization. Way back after the Orlando shooting occurred and the discussion surfaced about deportation and citizenship removal from those connected to terrorism, he was among those saying that they shouldn't be deported because they should be in rehabilitation here, in prison, in Canada, here.
It's a little bit passing the buck. I mean, we're going to send it back to Jordan. I mean, Jordan is a hotspot for extremism, radicalization. We here in Canada should probably concentrate on de-radicalization and counseling in prisons.
Sure, put them in prison, and then what do? You hand them a Quran. Brilliant. Genius. In prison, they're congregating and plotting, because you hand them a Quran and say, read this. But of course, reminding them that they're to read it, but don't take it seriously. Except scum like you want them to take it seriously. Don't you scumbag. Because I see you're still making sure your facial hair remains decorated with the obligatory telltale signs that signals your devoted allegiance with your brethren out there, even if you have to do some lying and faking and pretending and all the rest of the crap that comes with the peddling and pimping of your decrepit fucking beliefs. You fucking mongrel. That's why he can nonchalantly admit that around certain times of the year in the Middle East, lots of killings are regular and expected.
You know, and in the Middle East already you had suicide bombings in Shia areas. I mean, that's just regular Ramadan in the Middle East, but...
Well, guess what, you subhuman mongrel? It's not going to become a regular thing over here, inasmuch as slime puddles like this and you think so. But hey, since it's such a normal and expected thing over there, then it's all the more reason to yank a citizenship that should never have been in the first place and ship their degenerate asses, along with yours, back to the arena where you can all acclimatize and harmonize the best. You would think this would make people maybe stop and reconsider the cause of it all, but nope. I've never seen so many people ignore the laws of cause and effect. The movement should be de-religionized, not de-radicalized. I always chuckle too when I read notations about PhDs related to psychological studies on the Wikipedia pages of slangbags like this. Psychological studies, what a laugh. I said in Trash Day 1, you people don't know what normal is.